quorum down.
Ultra quorum, super quorum.
You brought it to us.
I did. Did not, yeah.
Okay, so the live streaming and recording is starting. So Rich, we're ready when you are.
Okay, well then. Welcome to the February 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. My name is Rich Mintz and I'm the chair of the committee. Tonight we are joined by Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law requires all community board members who are not able to attend in person to have their cameras on and the first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, you can raise your questions by raising your hand. If there is time following our discussion, we will field questions from the public. And before I go on, I just want to say I'm wearing a mask just protectively, not for any reason. If I cough, it's just my seasonal bronchitis. I do not have COVID. I tested this morning. So.
You told us that last.
I know, it's true. Well, I'm wearing it again.
Yes, exactly.
I'm wearing it again.
Still have a little cautious.
I don't object. I don't get it personally. So we need a volunteer to take minutes tonight, and maybe there's someone who hasn't taken them before, who's willing to review the recording. Kyle will be taking minutes. So we will now take attendance by roll call. Brian Lafferty will conduct a roll call.
Committee members, I'll call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I'll announce if there is quorum. Abby Cruzmark. Hearing anything, so I'll move on. Eric Goldberg.
Present.
Thank you. Livia Shrednick is excused. Miriam Roof.
Present.
Thank you. Matthew Weintraub. Not hearing anything, so I'll move on. Nad Kalani.
Here.
Thank you. Rich Mintz.
Present.
Thank you. Sandra Leptoff.
I'm here.
Thank you. Kyle Athai.
Present.
Thank you. Good. So with 6 members, we have 4.
Thank you, Brian. Tonight's agenda was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is about to be reflected on the screen in front of you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes for the January 31st, 2024 meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the January 31st, 2024 meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CV6 website. And just for the record, Abby is now here. Some ground rules in order to conduct an efficient meeting. Number 1, no one may speak until I grant you the floor. Number 2, committee members in person, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand and I'll identify you so you can speak. Committee members unable to attend in person, if you have a question about committee business, raise your hand please through Zoom and I will identify you so you can speak. It's extremely important that only one person speak at a time so that people watching at home can understand what is being said by each committee member. And finally, the chat function for committee members present via Zoom should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to technical difficulties or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. Tonight's meeting will be less, focused than the last one, which was very focused on resolutions. We're gonna talk for a few minutes about, the, ongoing housing advocacy related to the, Spark, Science Campus, on the, Bellevue, the, Brookdale property. And then we're gonna talk, about, some of our past resolutions and try to hash out some priorities for the coming year. Going off the discussion that we had at the end of the last meeting. So first, regarding Spark, hang on, I have some notes. Are you all familiar with this? This is the science, campus, health sciences campus that's going in, on the east side of First Avenue between 25th and 26th Streets, right? And it's a large property. It's probably the second largest development site in our district after the Soloviev site below the UN. And we've already been presented to about this, and we've passed a resolution as a community board strongly asking for affordable housing on the campus. It is unclear whether we're going to get it. We've said directly to the EDC, the state agency coordinating this, that we would like to see affordable housing on the site. We've been on record in previous years that we would like to see the site used for affordable housing. We've seen the renderings and the descriptions of how the buildings are likely to be used, which are in these fancy booklets. They have not formally agreed to put housing there, but there is a chance that we're going to be able to get something. It's most likely to be dormitory space, maybe for CUNY, to replace the Brookdale dormitory space that's being demolished. Apparently, it was the CUNY student community was blindsided when this was announced a year ago. It's the most affordable dormitory space in the CUNY system, and to have it disappear will have an impact on thousands of people.
I actually live there.
You live there.
Yeah, I live
So,
there.
do you have a perspective on, whether it's important to have dormitory space in this part of the
Yeah.
community?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we have Baruch nearby as well.
Yeah.
And then ironically, this is the dormitory for Hunter College, which is further than Baruch, but outside of this space, there is no affordable dormitory space
Yeah.
for students. So that was something that Baruch students struggled even with Brookdale there.
Yeah.
And now it's something that will be exacerbated once gone.
Okay. Well, so, we'll take the CUNY housing. I think we as a board have previously said that we would prefer more housing than that. It seems unlikely that we're gonna get it. So given the timeline of this, I'm not sure what we can do, but I wanted to have a brief discussion about it. The ULURP land use review process is going to begin a bit later this year. We're actually having a follow-up presentation next week at the land use committee from EDC. I don't know if it's just a progress report or a direct response to concerns that we've raised as a community board. Groundbreaking is supposed to happen in 2025. Completion is supposed to happen in 2031, which sounds like a really long time away, but I guess it takes 5 years to build something like this. Just speaking commonsensically, it's likely that our community board is going to support the project when it comes to a ULURP vote, given that it does bring lots of benefits to our community. But I'm wondering if there are ways that we can make our strong feelings about not just affordable housing, but a lot of affordable housing and community affordable housing in addition to dormitory space known before the plans are locked. And I don't know if there's I don't know if it would achieve anything for us to testify, this committee to testify in front of the EDC when we're at land use next week. I don't know if it would make sense for us to send a letter. And if we did send a letter, if that would be something that the full board would have to weigh in on. maybe not, given that we are already on record as saying we want affordable housing as our first priority. But I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts on things that we might do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're also in charge of the community advisory group with
Okay.
Keith Powers, like that's like the task force or whatever that we are co-chairing with them.
Okay.
So we do have that platform as well, to really emphasize this.
And is that a platform that speaks with one voice? Like, is that a?
No, so that'll be a number of local stakeholders will be part of that,
Okay.
but we're leading that with council members, so.
Do you know anything about the timeline for that? Because I'm worried that this is gonna get away from us. And I'm worried, I mean, I'm concerned, just sort of practically, that it's gonna get away from us. And we won't have an opportunity to actually influence anything, given that the pretty pictures are already drawn.
I mean, I would say I know that they had a open house,
Mhm.
maybe 2 weeks ago.
And Brian, you were there, right? At the open house?
Not at the.
Okay.
I did go to the open house,
Okay.
but, so I think the housing piece has been raised on a
Okay.
few occasions and
Well,
also.
we raised it right to the,
Yeah,
to the guy in our land use meeting.
yeah, and I think also Harvey Epstein had a community meeting recently and this was raised as part of it. But I was gonna say, beyond that, I think within the community task force, they've said that explicitly,
Okay.
right? I mean, again, which should be
So it's
supported,
not
but it
just us,
feels like,
not just
I
us.
No,
don't
no,
think
no,
so,
no.
yeah.
So Waterside's there,
students, yeah,
Stuytown is
yeah.
there, students,
Yeah.
CUNY.
And I think the students have been, they'll probably, I mean, I haven't been everywhere, but a very loud voice,
They tend to do
yeah,
that.
yeah. So, yeah,
Got it.
and what I heard was that there was some reluctance to replace it with student housing for student housing, because they're saying, oh, we have other places within the system that we could replace dormitory space, and that I guess, the price point for this current housing certainly wouldn't be the price point for new housing. So that might not be the trade-off that the students were looking for, but either way, just my thought is like, I mean, what are the density controls here and stuff like that? Like, just build up. Like, I don't know, there's this school here that honestly, I'm not sure who's searching for a new high school in our area. It's not a bad thing, but like, I don't know, housing is in desperate need and you're gonna lose all these units. I would think that would be either up or in place of somewhere.
Yeah.
What are you saying, build up to?
I don't know, I'm not an architect, but I'm just looking, there's a lot of tall buildings and there's one that's not very tall.
Oh, I see.
I don't know, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like.
I was just gonna say, and I agree with that, Eric, and I think, one of the things that we hear is that sort of like thematically with this campus, it doesn't fit in to have like a residential building or anything like that, because you have academia, you have, public buildings, research centers, that type of stuff. But there are models throughout the rest of the city where you have mixed use buildings or even a residential building that was built on the same sort of property in agreement
Yeah.
to build whatever the new development was, an office building. Like my office is part dormitory, and then the building attached to it, it's the same sort of infrastructure, is residence. So there are models to kind of combine these things throughout the rest of the city that could be borrowed. So the notion that, it doesn't fit thematically, or this is not necessarily the space, is just BS,
People will live where there's space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, we can always build
Yes.
higher, yeah.
Help me understand, what are the pressure points that one uses? Because you kind of are saying that you don't think, A, it's a time issue, and B, there isn't a real pressure point that you're establishing, so just help me
It seems
understand.
like, given the existence of the community advisory group, getting something into Keith Powers' mouth is one of the pressure points that we have. Because he is one of the people who will be voting ultimately on whether the project is approved. And also giving Harvey Epstein some cover by making clear that our community board is vociferously in support of adding housing and adding ideally more than dormitory housing. And that we are willing to consider increased height in exchange for housing. And I say consider because the community board has not voted that way. but certainly it's something that we would bring to the board if it were offered to us.
So it's Harvey Epstein is the.
It's
is
the,
the-
it's-
is the
it's-
person you wanna influence, just so
Well,
I understand where the influence.
no, I think we want to, because I assume that Keith Powers is generally in favor of the idea of housing on the site. But that's different from getting Keith Powers to say, this is a very high priority and I would like to see the project. You know, I mean, Keith Powers is a public servant, but he's also a politician and he's careful what he says. And I mean nothing disrespectful by that. I'm just speaking fact. So,
No, I was just gonna add to that too. I would say also the pressure point is not just locals, because this is really being pushed through by the governor and the mayor.
yeah,
So this is their pet project. So, you know, it's one of those things where even if like locals are against it, like if they want to get it done, they're gonna, you know, really expend that
but
political
what's
capital
the
on
pressure point on the governor and the mayor?
it. Well, that's the thing, is like nothing really, but you know, mayor has reelection coming up, you know, like this is a, you know, it could be a priority issue.
And also
The
just seems so
residents,
disjointed with the narrative that's going on
Well,
in the
that's-
community, which is
Yes,
you're gonna
Yeah.
redevelop an entire city block and take away housing.
And I would,
Right,
yeah, and I would add
that's
to
the
that too,
narrative
is
that's
that this particular avenue is like sort of like this innovation avenue, because on 26, that health building on 26th and First,
yeah,
they're redeveloping that too into
Yeah.
like a science sort of center. So you have all these opportunities for innovation and opportunity,
Yeah.
but then no one can actually live near the
Yeah.
opportunities. So who is that actually for at the end of the
Right,
day?
people said it could be housing for the people who are gonna work here.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be for.
Sandra, did you have something to say?
Well, I don't do the political so good, but I think about, Eric, you said it sort of very well, that's a news article, right? I mean, I think of publicity, not through us, because nobody really listens to it, but that's aside. But the city has covered, you know, they're terrific. And you put that in the city, just the way you said, you know, there's.
So the city, .NYC, the news organization, yeah.
It's the online newspaper, it's amazing. And there's, of course, they're getting lots of funding from, Trinity Church Wall Street. And I don't know if you folks know that organization. Anyhow, they give it to various publications and so on that are working on housing issues. And they are supporting the city. So I think of get it in newspapers, and then you've got a much more public face to it than us trying to
Yeah,
go behind.
Well, I'd say that's kind of how you leverage the community action group, right? Is that if you have a number of stakeholders who are from different walks of life, and you know, you have
Yeah.
students, you have Stuytown, you have Waterside, you have community board, so on and so forth, and Keith as well, if you know, he comes on board sort of more aggressively on that, then you have something that I would say, like, you know, even more than newspapers is like actually organizing around it, like we see what's
Yeah.
going on with Mount Sinai Beth Israel, that's organization, that's people power, that's not just a news article and
yeah,
you know, in a city specific, you know, source, but something that really is gaining traction across the board.
I'm gonna ask Kyle, in his capacity as a civilian who has experience with this, not in his capacity as former chair, what's the protocol around reaching out to the press on behalf of the community board to discuss
So
issues?
the chair of the full board is the spokesperson
Okay.
for the board, so all of this should be going through
Okay, so
from
any,
you to Sandy.
any outreach to directly to the press needs to be,
Yeah, unless the
either done
chair
by Sandy
otherwise,
or
like,
explicitly
Yeah, unless the chair
designated by
otherwise says
Okay.
you're my proxy to.
Cause I actually have gotten inquiries from a couple of reporters.
Mhm.
About these issues. Someone reached out to me about MSBI. And it's possible that those relationships could be turned into coverage, which is not the same as organizing, but is one of the.
Oh, it's
things that we
something,
can
it's a
do.
tactic, yeah.
So one of the action items that I should talk to Sandy.
Yeah, and I mean, any sort of press inquiries that come in, I would always suggest for anybody just to forward it to the board office.
Okay,
Loop them in and then have them connect with Sandy, and then Sandy will pull you in as necessary.
okay, that sounds good. So I have not been part of the community advisory group conversations. Is that moving forward? Is anything happening?
I mean, I only know that it is because I was involved in helping to get a student involved, but I am not involved. So that was why I just know that
Yeah.
it's happening, and I think that there's one in early March. I could ask the person who.
I mean, or you just ask
Yeah,
Sandy,
yeah,
she's
yeah,
the co-chair,
yeah,
so.
Yeah.
Say what the community advisory board is and what it does.
Kyle knows.
So, yeah, so when this first came up, so when, just a little bit to go back a little bit on this too. So we had been advocating for this space for a long time because originally it was supposed to be turned into a sanitation, transportation garage, yeah. And the community was really, really opposed to that because obviously next to residents, next to a school as well, didn't want to have sanitation there. So we had been pushing for a long time to make this sort of like open space, green space, you know, the things that affordable housing, the things we're all talking about. Which is why some of these things are actually reflected in this plan. But then it was in fall of 2022, I believe, like this actually actually took a lot of people by shock. It wasn't just CUNY students, because they came with like sort of a fully developed plan that had not been really talked about publicly before. So all of us were kind of like, okay, like this is, at least it's on a garbage, you know, station, but you know, where did all of this come from, you know, type of thing. And that's why, you know, initially, and as chair, you know, we were very, you know, happy that it wasn't a sanitation garage, but we're like, hey, we have a lot of questions about this and the public really needs to be involved in terms of anything that gets finalized. So as part of the negotiations of this moving forward, we had really strongly advocated that the community board be part of, you know, some sort of advisory group or lead that advisory group itself, to pull in all of these voices to give recommendations on this particular project to all of the agencies that are, you know, leading this and organizing, which is like EDC, but.
And who's the Andy that said, okay, yes, there will be.
Well, I think it was partly probably Keith advocated for it as
Yeah.
well, and then finally EDC, you know,
Yeah,
any,
EDC, he's like-
I mean, any type of these projects, right, part of it is community engagement.
Yeah.
Right, is a huge part of it, and so it's kind of a no-brainer to create some sort of group. Some people are hesitant about that because then that puts a lot of
Oh,
cooks in
we
the
could say
kitchen.
anything, yeah.
And people can say anything and demand a lot of things, so to have it chaired by Keith and by the community board is in a way like more efficient.
Oh, in other words, you're saying that it's a way for them to engage the public at a relatively low risk that the.
I wouldn't say low risk, but I would say in a more controlled, efficient
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just like anybody can come in and say, I want a football field here
Yeah.
or whatever. But it's more the filter of, okay, it's the local elected, it's the local community board, X, Y, and Z, you know, tenants association presidents, things like that. But that was only announced right before I stepped, you know,
Yeah.
my tenure was over. And so anything that's happened since then would be through
All right.
Sandy.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna see Sandy in a couple days, so I'll.
Yeah,
bring
or
it.
exec, yeah.
Yeah.
And bring it, that's.
I don't know if it's open for.
Oh.
to the public.
Yes, if we have someone who'd like to speak, please. go ahead.
Oh, if you'd like me to come up to the podium.
So the podium?
Yeah.
Well, you can sit. You can sit.
It's fine.
You can sit
Is
down.
that right?
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's for people online too, so if you wanna speak.
Yeah.
out and-
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, speak on
Yeah.
it. So I am part of the coalition that's working to keep Israel open. So I was just curious to follow up on what you said about like the organizing side of this, or the role of the community board in organizing. So the this community engagement force that you mentioned, is that open to the public? Or is it just the community board that's a part of it?
No, so it should be open to the public. But I'm no longer involved in it because I'm not the chair anymore. So
Okay.
however it's operating.
But
it's- yeah.
we'll find out. I mean, it's certainly open to the public in the sense that members of the public are part of us. But we should find out if it has meetings.
Yeah, I don't know if these meetings are like public meetings, like this meeting that people from the public can come attend, or it's something that they sort of convene as an advisory group and then publish, you know, whatever the outcomes are.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say for Beth Israel, at least, we tried to form a group really quickly. We started meeting weekly. We drafted a petition super quickly. And I think just in terms of like pushing really loudly to make sure that there's housing as part of this plan, I just think there has to be like a bigger microphone. And I feel like if this group is really tightly controlled to serve an advisory function, then maybe it's not the right vehicle for organizing, but I just wanted to put that out there, just to consider, like, if Keith Powers and whoever else is kind of is controlling the voice of this group really tightly, then you may not be able to organize as effectively.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of goes to the role of the community board, right? The community board's not an advocacy group in itself or a city agency, so there's certain limits to what we can and can't do. So even like Rich is saying, like the chair can't even go out and speak on an issue unless we vote on it. So we may have personal opinions and might be involved in other things and, but as a community board, the function in itself is more advisory than anything else.
So are you aware if there's any kind of community-based group that's formed to advocate for housing at this place, at this location?
Unless the.
No,
students are part of it,
yeah, I mean, the students are very loud and have showed up at these, listening
Yeah,
sessions.
and it's not really within our purview to be like, hey, like, let's advocate together, like, we could do that in our personal lives, but not as the community board.
Not like the
Yeah, and the
functions.
function as a
Yeah.
community board, to be like, hey, we're advocating, we're gonna protest,
Mhm.
because we can't do that.
No, but we can say over and over, our board is on record as saying that affordable housing is our first priority for the site.
So, yeah, so the way to kind of think about it too, and it's the same thing with the MSBI stuff too, is like, we couldn't come out and be part of anything until we actually had a meeting or voted on it, which we did like earlier last month. So we couldn't even come out to speak on that. So like when I was getting invited to all of these meetings in the fall,
Yeah,
I couldn't speak on the calls because we didn't take a vote on anything.
got it.
So you're kind of limited in that way, but what we kind of are useful for is we're a tool in that toolbox, and that when we put out a resolution, we're speaking on behalf of the entire community. And you can go, whoever organizes can go and be like, hey, like, here's a resolution from Community Board 6 or the task force that they're working with CB3. They're really focused on this and they really need these services, so on and so forth. It gives you the sort of, the foundation to make those, advocacy initiatives. Yeah.
The resolution we passed, last week on the full board, it did mention housing
It did.
for this, so we've already passed something.
Yeah, so that's why it's okay to say Community Board 6 is on record supporting affordable housing in this division. That is, I mean, people who are not us can say anything they want, but even we could say that, because it's true.
But before that, we couldn't technically say that, yeah.
But we have like already done that, I just wanna.
Yes,
We've
Good
passed
point, yeah, it
something,
says that it's a line
that-
item, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are our action items coming out of this conversation? One of them is for me to talk to Sandy about the community advisory group. And to find out if we know about any specific advocacy initiatives around housing. We can't necessarily join them, but we should know about them and be able to answer factual questions about them.
Yeah.
Can we also put that on the website, and can it even just as advisory board? So people know about it, and that's not taking a position, but, I mean, we're an information source.
Yeah.
Passing resolution, so.
Yeah, if there's something,
To me, that.
like if there's a public meeting, we should publicize it.
Yeah, that's fine, but even to just put a little thing that this exists, so people know about it, and then we go from there.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a small item, but as Mariam just said, it's like, right now, we have a resolution where there's a line item embedded, within the therefore at the bottom, but like, this is, you've said many times, the primary, item that our community thinks we're lacking and we need. I mean, is there a benefit in just saying we want a specific resolution that just says we want there to be housing on this?
Yeah,
And I don't know if that does anything or
Yeah,
not, or
yeah.
it goes in the ether, but
Yeah.
is there a rationale?
I mean, and this
Yeah.
is kind of like,
Yeah.
the strategic thing about community
Yeah.
boards, right, is like what is our role in the process? The only thing that I can think of that could actually hold, someone to the fire on this
Yeah.
is if we reject the ULURP.
Right, yeah,
Altogether and say, we hate this plan altogether because there is no housing in it.
right.
But then that also has the risk of like, they're like, okay, well, then we'll just put the garbage, station there,
Yeah.
anyway, so. And then even if we vote against that, remember, it's still the electeds who have to vote on it, so that could be one of those moments where we vote against the ULURP, but then the electeds go against what the community board says and votes for it anyway.
But I think as you're
Yeah.
saying, it's sort of a tension there, like, is this a big enough issue that you wanna say, hey, let's do a little brinksmanship, right? And say, hey, you're decreasing housing in the city as a result of this project, like, we reject plans that reduce housing. I don't know
Rupal,
if I agree with that, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that's the.
Rupal's hand is up, so I would like to.
Yeah.
So,
Do I promote the panelists?
I promoted.
Okay, all
So Rupal, you should be able to speak.
Hi, Yeah, so I just wanna reiterate a couple of points because my hand was raised for a while. I think we should add more pressure on all the electeds, including not just Keith Powers and Harvey Epstein, but also Kristen Gonzalez. And I think the way we can do it with the mayor and the governor is local press, local news articles, things like that. I think that makes it louder. That way more of the community can also know and get involved. Because I feel like a lot of this stuff, an average member of the community may not be aware, right? Like everybody's aware of the casino project because it's that loud microphone that we have with the casino project. I feel like the microphone we have with this one isn't nearly as loud, right? You walk down Manhattan and ask anybody about the casino, they're going to know about it. You ask
Yeah.
about this, I'm not sure that they are going to be aware that they're taking away 700 units of housing with no plans or no chance of replacing them. I think if we get the community involved, that can add the pressure, at least on the mayor, because like somebody mentioned here, he's up for re-election.
Yeah,
So this is going to be an issue that will be important for people here. And as far as the student housing, Stuytown actually has student housing here. I think it's with NYU, and I'm not sure about this, but this is what I've heard from someone else, is that NYU is renting apartments here, but they're paying $2,200 per month per room. So they're taking 2-bedroom apartments, converting it into 3-bedroom, and charging almost $7,000 a month for it. All that's doing is increasing the rent. It's increasing, it's making it less affordable. Meanwhile, they're taking away 700 units. What do you think that's going to do? So those are the points. And I think I'm in support of just having a separate resolution that says we want housing in this project included, instead of that just one line item that Eric just mentioned. It's like, oh, by the way, here's just this one little thing down there. So I would say I'm in support of just writing that separate resolution, but I also think we definitely need to make more of an effort to get local news outlets involved.
okay, so I should have a conversation with Sandy about that then, because whatever we do should be coordinated with land use. And since I'm gonna see her, I'll put that on my list of topics. Thank you, and Rupal, I apologize for making you wait. I just was not looking at the screen, I was looking at the.
No worries. Everything I wanted to say got said by other people, so we're all good.
Okay. All right, well, maybe we can draw a line under this topic for now, with the knowledge that, we need to, follow up on the community advisory group. I need to talk to Sandy about, what our public stance, on this, might be. And I should talk to her about whether, it is appropriate for us to consider issuing a new resolution. I think those are the 3 items.
And we have the meeting with land use next month, I guess, right? So we could, is it?
No, there's, a joint meeting?
Yeah, so we
Yeah,
can use that as well.
that's in like 5 weeks.
Okay.
But there's another land use meeting before that,
Right.
that I'm gonna be at, so, but you're on land use too.
No,
right? Oh, okay.
yeah.
Super easy month for you then.
Committee chair now, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, why don't we go on to our discussion about, past resolutions and priorities? And, I was thinking we would do this in, 2 parts. One is, Nad came up with 2 past resolutions that we should put back on the table to discuss about whether there's a follow-up action that we should take. And then, we talked about a few priorities last time, that I would like to run through and think about what the next steps are. And, as part of that, I have 2 new topics that we might consider, resolutions for. And also, to give you a preview, I had a conversation with the enemy. I talked to someone, who is involved in the development community who hates rent stabilization. And I asked, look, what do you think we should advocate for, that is likely to get more housing built, in our community? If you assume that rent stabilization itself is off the table, that attacking that is off the table. And I actually got some useful feedback, so we'll talk about that when we get to it. But so why don't we start with your 2 resolutions? The 2 were about public restrooms, and about NYCHA, costs of sanitation, and let's see, which one is it? This must be, yeah, why don't we do the old one first?
Yeah, so this is a really old one. It was from like January 2010.
Oh,
So I was just like digging through some of the old ones. This was kind of a random one. I don't have as much context on like the NYCHA budget and how they go through it. But this was one where basically NYCHA right now pays for sanitation services, so that comes out of their budget and they have to pay for it. A lot of the other sort of relevant similar housing authorities don't. So this was a resolution basically saying that NYCHA should no longer be forced to pay for it. This would obviously be good for NYCHA. It frees up some of their budget just to do other things and basically make services better for them. We passed it in 2010 when there was like a bill that was up at that point, and nothing happened at that point. One of the reasons I like wanted to bring it up again is Harvey Epstein actually sponsored a bill last like session to do the same thing. So
So
clearly,
it's still open.
yeah, so it's still an open thing. It hasn't moved. It's kind of a more esoteric one. Like it's harder to say like exactly what will happen, what will NYCHA do with the funds. But that was one where we had, in the spirit of what we talked about last meeting, of just like bringing things back. This is one that is still a live issue that hasn't really changed yet.
Do you know by any chance? I know doing this amount of research is great, let alone the question I'm gonna ask. So this idea of being responsible for sanitation, are there other things that seem strange that they have to pay for?
It's a good question.
Yeah,
I don't know, but yeah,
I
like,
wonder what else it is.
Yeah,
Like
it's
what
been-
would be the consideration?
yeah, it's been interesting because like this bill from 2010 and then the one Harvey Epstein sponsored last session were both specifically about sanitation. So I don't know if it's like maybe other bodies don't pay for it. They're like just bringing NYCHA in line or how they thought about that, but yeah.
So just to make sure I understand, they're a state chartered agency, and they are paying the city of New York for sanitation services?
I'm not sure if they're
Are you
state.
talking about NYCHA?
Yeah,
It's federal. There's federal money.
there's federal
Yeah.
money, but, like, what I don't understand is why the legislature is the one who decides. I guess because it's a quasi-governmental agency. Well, it doesn't matter, we know that it's the case, since,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably Department of Sanitation can just choose to not invoice them for it, right? More than the other way around. Like,
yeah.
so I think it's just like whoever.
It's like a chargeback.
So
Yeah,
essentially,
exactly.
Kind
The
of
le-
thing.
the
It's like
legislation
money
would be
that's
that
off their books.
New
Yeah.
York State should separately fund the sanitation services for NYCHA rather than having New York City just do it and bill them.
Maybe,
Yeah,
it's definitely possible. I think it's just basically, yeah, like, I think it's just like. Department of Sanitation would just like no longer invoice them, I guess,
Yeah.
and then they just have to, find the funding from the rest of their organization, so it would get funded elsewhere.
So this opens, of course, the question of all the other things that NYCHA needs. And I'm afraid to open that box, because it's such a big box with so many things in it. But I don't actually know. I mean, I know that the biggest thing is the maintenance backlog. But I don't actually know what, like, I don't know what we should do.
I was just gonna say, for this type of topic, what I would suggest for the committee is to like hyper focus and
Yeah.
then go more macro,
Yeah.
because we do have a NYCHA development. Strauss houses in our area, and kind of focus on what specifically that development needs, because
Yeah.
each development throughout the city is bigger, like I work near Amsterdam houses and
Right.
Addition and Harborview, which have several different issues, right? So.
But there are structural problems within the system that need structural solutions, and we could advocate for those. I mean, this is a sort of small structural problem.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you could either do something super micro
Yeah.
and say, okay, that's a really good thing to pull out. And then in that resolution, have something that says, no, any of those savings or any of the budget from NYCHA that's not being used and say that comes from another budget, that has to be reinvested in maintenance, right?
Yeah.
Because like elevators are broken, cameras, crime, stuff like that. Security guard, maybe, something like
But I
that.
like the setup. I'm sort of thinking about, okay, so you have the Strauss houses and what are the issues there? And then in hopes of solving a community issue, you're coming up with global policy changes to
Yeah.
do that. You'd be like,
Because,
hey, here's the
yeah.
problem, here's what needs to be solved, and here's one or two ideas to try and help fund it.
Yeah, because I think that's a big, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, wouldn't Manhattan Borough Clerk's office have data on this already? Right, it would seem to me that
On what specifically?
on what the issues in any of these, what are the issues that NYCHA housing is facing and they don't have the funding for that.
Yeah, and-
They already did the budget one, they know where
And
the
there's-
problems are, and I assume they did it by,
There's reporting too, like,
right, so we don't wanna reinvent the wheel on this.
Right, but do they know what's going on in the Strauss houses, I guess, is.
Yeah, well,
is-
that's
is
an
the
easy
point.
question, right?
Right, yeah, that's the specific one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, so it sounds like we have two,
And I actually wouldn't say that it's that easy, because I don't think a lot of people actually communicate with
yeah,
NYCHA developments and their tenant associations, so there's an idea of what NYCHA needs, and then there is what NYCHA actually needs, right? And some of those sometimes overlap.
and as part of that Venn diagram, there's the things that, the areas in which NYCHA is underperforming and hasn't asked for help.
Right.
Which, you know, one of the issues that came up this week via reporting is that NYCHA has 5,000 vacant apartments because they changed the way that they repaired apartments to put them back on the market and essentially broke their operating procedures on that. And so the number of vacant apartments went up from like 500 to 5,000 in a few years. And, you know, on the one hand, 5,000 is not a lot of apartments. It's like, you know, 1% of the total number of apartments in the system. On the other hand, it's a lot of apartments. And the 5,000 families that have nowhere to live, who are at the top of the list, would be happy to see those apartments come back on. So, you know, like, is there something we need to do about that? And I guess I'm just sort of throwing the topic out, like, did you think that we should pass another resolution reiterating our support for what we resolved in 2010?
Like we could, because it did come up last session, so I feel like maybe it's like talking to Harvey Epstein, understanding sort of like how he thought about it too, because I'm sure he had context and he thought about it when he did bring it up.
Yeah.
And then it's probably strategically doing that. I think I can add some thought there and be more thoughtful about like how we want to approach it. Maybe it's like, here are specific things that we want to solve with the Strauss houses that are like, you know, a broader thing.
Yeah.
But I do think it's like it was an interesting one because I was like, look, there is momentum here.
Yeah.
We can support that and we can try to make something happen.
We have an elected who knows us, who is behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you can just forward this to him too and be like, hey, like, we're aligned on this because we passed it 15 years ago.
Yeah,
And then we can update it to reflect what's in his new law.
it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a good
And then
idea.
he gets the political capital to
Yeah,
go out and be like, hey, like, community board 6 said this, now let's get 3 and whatever, you
So
know?
it's another thing on my Sandy list to
Yeah,
talk to Sandy about whether, it's okay with her if I reach out to his office.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. And so we might bring that back.
Yeah, and I would also suggest like strategically too, like focusing this resolution, if we do a new one, on what Strauss Houses needs, right? And we can say, okay, like, for example, they have a performing arts center, right? So there's this idea of like, okay, like, NYCHA needs Wi-Fi, right? Like the Wi-Fi services are terrible, which is true. But you talk to people who are actually from NYCHA and they're like, well, actually, I'm more concerned about crime, so I'd rather have, you know,
Security
video
cameras,
cameras in the elevators because I can't walk out it after, 7 o'clock, which is an experience that a lot of NYCHA development residents have. So it could be something like that, and if we hyper focus on that, pass it, then Sandy's able to go to Borough Board and talk to all of the other Borough Board chairs, right?
Yeah.
And say, hey, like, you have NYCHA developments, you have NYCHA developments, you have NYCHA developments, let's put a Borough Board resolution.
Yeah.
That's the sort of broader thing that we want. That's strategically, to me, I always think like the more local you start and then you build up to be more expensive, it's more effective that way.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so why don't we, set that one aside and look at the other one, which is more recent, and still, going on, and that was the, call for public restrooms.
Yeah.
If I recall, this intro passed.
Yeah,
didn't
it did.
Yeah,
Yeah, so this is the public bathrooms, like one in every zip code. This bill did, like, I guess, drove past. The one thing that we bring it up again is, so we got the budget or preliminary budget requests back, I guess, like a month ago now. And in that, like, they were basically saying like, oh, like, let us know locations and we'll like work on citing them. So I think it's just like, look, we made progress here. I think now that we have that request of specific like locations, I think just us taking the time to basically say, where could this make sense? Where can we get it to happen? Just to keep the thing moving forward.
is that a topic for us, or are we stepping on land uses toes?
It's a combo.
Yeah, it's
It
also
depends who wants it.
homelessness. Yeah, it's kind of like,
I mean, I think we want it.
yeah.
I know when these came up before, the issue was why isn't this in the health?
Health, I mean, it
And
could,
I don't see it as a housing.
oh, that's right.
And I
You-
said it there.
You said that then, yes, it's true, fair enough.
Yeah.
It could be a homelessness issue though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm I'm on the, coordinated committee, of the Manhattan, community boards on this, but I don't attend all meetings. They meet regularly to talk about, restroom issues. It's pretty developed. Maybe I should reach out, to the committee and find out how other community boards are handling this.
So is there they're asking the community board to say, give us a few sites?
Yes,
Yeah, so like in the
Okay.
preliminary, there was a link and it's like you can request it at this link. So I think it's just on us to
So maybe
actually.
it's Sandy's assigning it to someone.
if I
to say,
recall,
yeah,
that was in the
someone do it,
legislation
yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
that the community boards
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
proposal.
But maybe it's just asking
Who's
Sandy, being like,
coordinating?
who's doing this?
Yeah,
who's
Yeah,
coordinating?
and when, yeah.
This is
yeah.
the make Sandy do more.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
assign it to a committee, yeah, or a person,
All right.
yeah.
Like when you go to the link, where does that go?
I think it's DOT.
Okay.
I need to check, but I think it's,
It's probably DOT.
Yeah.
Because they're I mean, DOT is, if I recall, is the reason why we don't have more of those, independent kiosk restrooms. 'Cause
Right, yeah.
they're the ones who couldn't get it done.
yeah,
Does it complicate things to also combine it with the e-bike rest area we passed a resolution on?
Good question.
Cause restrooms was a big one for them. And also
Yeah.
shelter.
Which is a conversation I should have with, Graham, I'm getting a lot of.
We're
action
giving you
items
so
out of
much
this.
stuff.
Sorry, I gave you
But
action.
it's kind
items
of your
last
fault.
Yes. So I should talk to Jason. It's fine. All right.
Quite complex, like where they go because of the piping and the.
Yeah, that's
And
the
you can't
reason why
go
we
that
don't
way
have, that's
anyway.
what, that's why they have all those
Yeah.
kiosks in the warehouse.
It's also one of those, sort of tasks, again, like, I'm gonna say BS a lot for a lot of this stuff, because it's like, okay, now tell us the sites, but it's like, we don't know the
Yeah.
plumbing of New York City, you
Right.
know, and like, where would be in, like, put it right there, you know, like, you could put one on every block, if, I don't care. But we don't know that, so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, we're giving you a, an olive branch, but we're not really, because who in their right mind would actually know all of that, except someone who's really in the weeds and that stuff,
Well,
so.
so many of the budget requests come back with, we need more information, which
Yeah.
is like, that must drive you insane.
yeah, we were going through it last meeting and it's like, all of them are like further study. This one actually
Yeah.
had like something you could do at least, so I
Yeah.
was like, let's see if we can move something forward.
All right, well, this actually has been a fruitful discussion, and we've identified a couple of areas where we actually have action that we can take, so that's terrific. I would like to, pivot us to the priorities conversation that we had. We talked about a few areas, income discrimination was one that I recall you were interested in. Abby was interested in section 8, administrative burdens for people applying for housing. Sandra was interested in protecting rent stabilization, which is something that I want to talk about a bit more in a minute. And then we have, questions of how to encourage new construction. How do we feel about the 421A replacement, that the governor has proposed that might incentivize more construction? How do we feel about, pushing, aggressively for housing, more housing on the solo casino site, if that happens? How do we feel about, well, there are other things, that would impact new construction. So, I guess my question is, what's the best path to make progress as a committee on each of these 4 or 5 issues that we've talked about?
I think the Spark stuff is connected to some of this.
The spark is connected to new construction and rent stabilization.
Yes. And just affordable housing. Especially if we're losing so much of it.
Yeah. Oh, the third thing that I was gonna say regarding new construction is the fact that the AMI regime basically isn't functional because affordable housing isn't really affordable to people who make under $140,000 a year or whatever.
But just walk me through that for a second, because I'm not as familiar with that. So, yeah.
The context is that, when, developers get bonuses, for including affordable housing in their, projects. What affordable housing means is, housing that can be afforded by people at a certain percentile in the average income range in our area. Because our average income range is so high, that effectively means that, you know, in many cases, people who make $150,000 a year are eligible to apply for affordable housing. And it doesn't really address the fact that we have, even in our district, tens of thousands of families that make less than that and are rent burdened and can't, you know, couldn't make the rent on something like that.
And I would just add, I mean, this is something that it's always like sort of in my mind is, as we talk about this, sort of in the same vein, you know, the whole rent stabilization regime doesn't actually serve people in need either.
Yeah,
Right, so
Yeah.
if you took a poll of the people in rent stabilized housing today, I don't know, there's probably a chance that they're outside of the 140% of AMI.
I mean, they're, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, like, our biggest housing program in New York City isn't an affordability program per se.
I mean, it's, you enter the rent stabilization system, you may enter it via, with an affordability means test, but once you're in it, you're in it. The difference is whether you're in it or not what your income is or becomes. And that, among other things, means that it's hard for people to enter it later in life. If your income is higher and then it drops, you know, you're not gonna be able to get into a rent stabilized apartment.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too, like what Sandra was talking about earlier, or sorry, about Rupal was talking about earlier, is that with these rents going high, like even if you are making $150,000, it might not be affordable to live in, you know, the neighborhood. And so we're getting to that point as well, where we're kind of like increasing the breadth of who's ineligible, or, you know, who's, I don't wanna say low income, but like who can't afford, you know, housing.
Yeah.
And so the further like that gap gets, you know, then we're starting to talk about people who are 150, 200K and can't afford to live in the neighborhood because the rents are going so high.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the other day, not to personally too much, but hey, in my development, I am competing against 3 students who are splitting an
Mhm.
apartment and, you know, trying to figure out who can pay more rent. The 3 students can pay more rent than I can.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
discussion,
Yeah.
that's all true.
Yeah.
The issue that we're not talking about is the good cause eviction, right? So we're saying, there are these bad guys and rent stabilized. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is this good cause eviction is sitting there, Opal sits on
Yeah.
it, we can't get it passed. And so you were the one, Eric, who got and said, here's how I have to live, but years ago.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's true, I mean, so I think more to the point, yes, there are people living in rent stabilized who are making decent salaries or whatever. But there's all this market rate that nobody can afford anymore.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that's where we should be. You know, that's a very raw issue.
When you say there's market rate that no one could afford,
I didn't
what?
say no one, but
Oh.
it's going. I didn't say no one, but it's very expensive, but go on.
No, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the
I'm-
issue is
I'm
you
saying-
get sucked in, you get an apartment and then the landlord can do whatever he wants.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but I mean, what I was gonna say is, what kinds of strategies do you think might be available to us to push back against the fact that we've got this bifurcated system with market rate that the average person can't afford, but rent stabilization that people can't get into?
Right, are you asking what can we do about this, there is a bill that's just been languishing.
You mean for good cause?
Yeah.
Specifically, yes, for
Yes,
good cause.
but I mean,
yes.
yeah, so I'm not sure what the questions you're asking.
Well, I
You're
was,
asking about what action?
yeah, I was responding to sort of the broader situation that you raised, which is that there's unaffordable, lots of unaffordable market rate housing, whose landlords are essentially ungoverned and can do whatever they want. Good cause is a response to the plight of the people who live in that housing. Then there's a rent stabilization system, which is actually very large, like more than a third of New York City households live in rent stabilized apartments. And that situation is at risk and kind of rickety for various reasons, which I'd like to talk about in a minute. And the market rate situation is getting worse. the rent stabilization situation is getting pressure from both the tenant side and the owner side. Is there anything we can do to respond to the structural brokenness of that system? Like, you know, I mean, it's good cause will help people who are already in units, but it won't, you know.
I mean, it's so unwieldy. I mean, just to give an example, right? There's a building that I'm involved with that has rent stabilized tenants that live in it. If that tenant moves out and vacates and you want a new tenant in, the cost is $2,000 to repaint the apartment.
Yeah.
Right? And you're gonna get an increase of $10 a month in rent. You know what I'm saying? So like, just to repaint the apartment, you're losing your net operating cost is negative, right? To do that, to repaint an apartment, something that simple, right? If you want to replace your refrigerator, right? I mean, that's coming out of the landlord's pocket for each piece.
Which is $600, and then they can raise the rent $10. Yeah, or
Over
whatever.
30 years, you know what I mean? It's like,
It's a permanent increase in the rent, so ultimately, you pay the landlord back more than they paid, right? So that's.
I'm not sure if that's true.
It is true.
I'm just saying over 30-year time horizon.
Yeah.
I mean, right, I'm saying, I mean,
You
like,
pay $10 a month.
yeah.
You might not be around to see
Yeah,
the
I'm just saying, there are pieces in that I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, I'm just saying
It
you
is
could
what it is.
understand why some of the costs that don't pass through, right? If someone's gonna live there for 30 years, right? Like, hey, I don't know, common sense things is, if you want a new refrigerator, like, I'd be happy for you to have a new refrigerator if you wanna buy the new refrigerator that they're staying there. And I'd especially be happy if, and I'm not saying this is most people, but if you didn't have a second home, you know, in wherever else, and you met an income standard and it was clear that the rest of the building was meant to support someone in need. So I'm just saying, when you look at a landlord's perspective, right, there's different groups of people and we don't have transparency to who those people are. Right, so to even understand who in your building actually is rent burdened, right, would be interesting.
Yeah.
Right,
But probably
right, to know.
outside the
Yeah.
scope of what we.
Yes,
can
no,
do.
I know, I'm just saying the complexity of it, because
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, there's so many stratifications to rent stabilization. There's rents that are $500 a month, right, that it's never gonna be worth it for a landlord to put a penny into that apartment. Even if they say to themselves, wow, someone's living in substandard conditions, right? I'm gonna wait as long as I can, because there's no, not
Incentive,
even,
no
there's no
incentive.
financial incentive at all. And then there's other rent stabilized units that, hey, if you're paying $2,000 a month for something in Manhattan, well, of course, right? It makes sense, but there's this big gap too, you know, yeah.
Well, I mean, we can't resolve
Yeah,
these
yeah,
things
yeah, yeah.
specifically. We can push for good cause. That's a good concrete step that we could take.
Yeah,
I mean, then that's follow-up because we passed on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but,
Yeah.
but
but it's, yeah.
it's a new session, you know.
No, but what I'm saying is it's.
Oh, it's the
more
same
like-
thing we were talking
It's like
about.
Sandy
Yeah.
being like, hey,
Yeah,
guys, like, we passed
Yeah.
this, like,
Yeah.
what are you doing now, right? And I think part of this too, as we think about, again, community board action items, right? Because I think that's also kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
What are the actionable things
What
that
do
we
we
can do?
Yeah,
I think we again, have to realize our role in this, like, we're not the decision makers, right? Like, we can't, like, if we could snap our fingers and actually change the system, like, that would be a whole separate conversation. We can do research, we can put out, opinions on behalf of the neighborhood, we can, amplify issues, again, like the think tank sort of, the model, but then it is actually the elected officials that we've elected to then use that information and be like, hey, this is what the community wants. This is what they've been talking about for 15 years.
yeah.
And then, for the public to kind of be like, hey, like, if the community board hasn't been in support of this, we're in support of this, and you're not doing it, then why the hell are you still in office,
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
let me find someone who will pass that, right? So that's kind of like the role that we have to play, is like, we can put the information out, we can speak on behalf of the community, and we can
Yeah.
amplify it all we want. But then at the end, like, enough people have to kind of go with that
We're in
and kind of be decisive with it.
We're in the unfortunate position of having mostly representatives that agree with us.
Yeah.
So, we can't really change their minds, but
And
we
it's not even
can't-
changing their minds, it's changing the minds of representatives in Queens.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
Bronx, Staten
understand,
Island.
I understand, I understand.
Yeah.
So I wanna raise, one other, we touched on some of the topics that I wanna talk about. I have you know, the AMI, the fact that affordable housing isn't really affordable is a big problem, and I don't know what the solution is. And I don't know what to push for.
I mean, and that could be something that we as a committee do, right? We do public hearings as a community board, right?
Yeah,
It could be, I'm not saying this is simple, but it could be something like putting out conversations in the community about what does affordability mean in 2024? Right? One of the things that I hear when I talk to people in the community is like, they don't want, like, especially with the casino, right? They're like, we don't want affordable housing, we want like middle-class housing, right? Like, I keep hearing that phrase, or like, what I would call like working class, housing, which is for people who are working, they may make a good salary, but they still can't afford to live here, right? Like, I shared this story like very similar to Eric, it's like, I had a good salary, but I live in the neighborhood and I live in my family's place because I can't afford my own place in my own neighborhood.
yeah,
Because a one bedroom is like $5,000, $6,000.
Yeah.
And that's too much of my income. Like, how the hell is that possible? And then you imagine people who are not with a steady, healthy job, having to live in the neighborhood too,
Or-
right? Or do you move to Florida, right?
or
Like,
like people who pass their midlife and are downsizing, like I won't be able to stay here, if I stop working. So, I mean, there are no options.
and I think sometimes in the housing conversation, that's not fully captured,
Yeah,
right? Like, who is actually being affected by this? Because we always focus on the most vulnerable, which is important. But then what about like young people, right? Like, our neighborhood is seeing like a loss of young people, young professionals, when we used to be the place for young professionals, right?
Just wanna do a time check.
Yeah.
I have to meet someone.
no, I understand. I mean, I was heading toward, wrapping up. Go ahead, Abby.
No, I just have a process suggestion. Maybe
Yeah.
we can have a standing agenda item that's like priorities.
Yeah.
And then if everyone takes an issue that they want to follow, they could like do an update at the meeting. If there's been any updates, and if they have been like ruminating on suggestions, like things we can do as a committee, so that things just don't fall off our.
Are you
radar.
saying that I should make assignments?
Yeah.
Delegate.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've got enough assignments for myself. So I'm not taking
I
any
think-
more.
I think the issues are really big and
Yeah.
there's a lot of them, and we can sort of help move them.
So what do we have on the table? We have good cause. We have, affordability. We have, income discrimination and, section 8 as two separate topics. What else do we have?
I'd say, what about the conversions?
Conversions is
Yeah.
another one. Yeah,
Because
that's
that'll be
true.
coming down our pipeline too.
Rent stabilization. There, but.
No, you mean office to
Office
residential?
to residential, yeah,
And,
which we voted in favor of.
yeah, we did.
But I think a couple of those projects are gonna come down the pipeline. And we should have, like, that's something that we actually have a say in, so.
And there is also, some, momentum at Borough Board, according to Sandy, for pushing for, affordability, requirements for those. Which
Exactly, yeah.
is, I'm not sure it's a good idea on the merits, but it's.
Yeah, cause just
something we should talk about.
I mean, just some of the projects that I've seen so far, like there was an article about one in our district on like Third Avenue.
Yeah,
The luxury apartment buildings,
yeah,
right? And it's like, again, goes to the root of what we're all talking about here. Is like, do we need more luxury apartment buildings, or do we need more like working class, middle class, whatever type housing, rather than like, you know, here's an Olympic sized swimming pool and like.
so it's really a
It's
what
like,
is
I would rather have
affordability conversation.
an affordable apartment than an Olympic swimming pool.
Yeah,
Just on the point about seeing all these luxury developments go up. Have you all looked into that bill that I think Emily Gallagher proposed about having a state-run development agency? I think that'd be something that's interesting to look.
it's
into.
true. We haven't discussed that.
I mean, part of the issue of relying on private sector developers is they're gonna cater to
Profit,
whatever,
yeah.
right, they're all profit driven. They're gonna put up luxury developments and hope that they can capture probably a fairly international market, people looking to buy
Yeah.
those places. So I think Emily Gallagher's bill, maybe that's something that could be looked into, but I know they did something like that in Maryland, I wanna say.
Yeah,
And they've generated a ton of great, high quality affordable housing.
and honestly, I don't know the reasons why the things she wants to do can't be done under the current authority of NYCHA. and not something that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was gonna say is because like, I mean, and we saw what happened in the night show a couple of weeks ago. It's just like the whole system is corrupt.
Yeah.
Like.
I'm sorry, somebody confusing, we talking about some development, some.
Agency, yeah.
She's
But then you put it in nitro, I can't follow.
No, I just said
You said
that.
that.
What I don't know is why a new agency is needed to do the things that she would like to do, given that NYCHA already exists.
But this is affordable, it's just a general category of affordable housing.
Yeah, I
So
don't know.
why would it be, why would that fall under nitro?
Well,
Which is a federal law.
it's social housing. Well, NYCHA is a city agency with state powers. I mean, it gets federal funding.
And they build.
But there's no reason why it couldn't build other things if we wanted it to.
Okay.
I mean, I don't.
No, I get what you
It's just a sort of.
Well, that's the thing. Like,
But
is it?
that's the concern.
That's exactly the thing.
Yeah.
I just, I don't wanna go in uninformed. All right, well, how should we wrap this up for today? What's on our, specific, agenda that should be assigned out? Someone needs to look into the state of good cause.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion would be like to hash this out with Sandy a little bit.
Talk to Sam, talk
to
about
Sandy.
these
Yeah, talk
specific.
about these, like, talk about all of this with Sandy.
Yeah,
Why
And
would
then-
we hand it back to her and not keep it in the committee? I
Well,
mean,
to prioritize.
Yeah, I mean, because we need to prioritize, so.
Well, can't we as a committee prioritize?
I mean, yeah, we could,
could.
but yeah, but I would
Okay.
suggest that he would speak to the chair to help prioritize.
Well, my experience has been that it gets too hierarchical. And
Yeah.
hold it into the committee, we talk about what we care about.
Well, some of these things,
And I think that's
Should we
really
do
important.
that
some of these
next
things are
time?
ours.
Huh?
Yeah.
I mean,
so
we could
did-
all be clear, we raised some issues last time,
Mhm.
and we could put them into a little,
Yeah, I mean-
statement that we each, wait, let me finish, that we each have. And bring it up at the next meeting or send it to you, Rich, and then you just put it in the,
Or build like a set of issues.
Yeah, here's the issues, and spell it out, what you mean.
So can I give you all homework to send back some thoughts about, based on this discussion, issues that you think we should consider moving on, so that I can build that into a sort of issues list that we can look at together?
I think
Okay.
some of it we've already talked about,
Yeah.
too, like what's happening with Spark and the
Yeah.
affordable housing. I
And
think a
that's-
lot
and
of
that's what I-
it,
that's
like,
my
we've already
point.
covered.
Is that a lot of this is follow-up,
Yeah,
like,
all right, well, I mean, I don't wanna leave things mushy, but on the other hand, I don't feel like I can give it assignments based on this conversation.
you can do it by email.
Yeah, I can do it by email. I mean, cause I have to talk to Sandy anyway about a bunch of these things, and I can put it all together into a final.
Yeah, because again, a lot of these things we passed resolutions on, it's
Yeah.
about holding them accountable to it now, and that has to come from her. Unless she's like, Rich, you can do it.
Yeah, she'll let me do
Yeah.
this.
But the other one is we could each send back to you what we had talked about
Yeah,
as a statement.
yeah,
Right?
I think that,
And
I mean,
go that way.
for those who have like that clear in their minds, please do that. And I can use that as info. All right, I know that we've run longer than we hoped, and so, I'm going to propose that we, break unless anyone has an objection.
You wanna talk about MSBI or anything?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I just had that in my head for
Just
some
'cause,
reason.
Yeah, all right, well, seeing no objection, consider the meeting, closed, dismissed at 7:43.